Is the civil society dead? Is Charlie Kirk's assassination yesterday the end of our efforts to build a civil society? Well, let's take a look at that on this very unique edition of the Steve Beaman Show.
In a world of uncertainty, where business, freedom, and the future hang in the balance, one voice rises with clarity, experience, wisdom, and conviction. This is the Steve Beaman Show, the voice of the independent American.
Sitting in my office today, and I am heartbroken. I'm angry. I'm all the things that all of you feel. This is an unnecessary travesty yesterday. Charlie never hurt anybody. He simply put out ideas. And those on the left who like to refer to his talk as hate speech, you're saying it's hateful to just disagree with someone? That's pathetic and ridiculous. And that makes it impossible for us to engage in civil discourse and have a civil society. I'm not sure where to go. I want to talk a little bit about the civil society in general and where we come from and try to put some perspective to this. If you've watched from time to time, you'll notice I don't even have my studio lights on today. I'm just not in the mood. Clearly, the goal of a civil society has been ours since the days of Socrates and Aristotle. As most of you know, I'm sure Socrates was actually assassinated or caused to die. He was murdered by the state because they were threatened by his asking questions of the powers that be. Coming through, you had obviously the Dark Ages, in which you weren't allowed to challenge anybody for anything, and then the Enlightenment, in which questioning things became real again, and you could question government, you could question your society, your social norms. It seemed to be progressing quite well, and then the Enlightenment led obviously to the creation of the United States, which was a godsend to this world. And I know there are those of you who say, well, this nation was founded on original sin and all that. It was founded by people, and people are sometimes capable of doing bad things. The reality is the nation was founded as a country that tried for the first time to give life, liberty, and property. That was the original three, changed to pursuit of happiness, but the rights to life, liberty, and property to its people. To give people the authority over government, never been done. And to give you the right to own land, which had never been done. If you look at why the Europeans hated us so much, it's because we could own land. The royals and go over to Europe now. It's not so easy to buy land. They never sell their land. In this country, it was a right. You could own your own land. And in fact, we had so much, the government gave it away. So you have this country that starts, and obviously we had a revolution that started it. But the idea that comes up in so many of the early writings is the idea of discourse, whether it's James Madison's writings or Jefferson's writings or, pick it, any of them. Benjamin Franklin stuff. I mean, they were all about a civil dialogue. And in this country, we engaged in civil dialogue. Go to the Lincoln-Douglas debates, which were on the most contentious of issues, slavery. But they had, good debates. We then engaged in a civil war to resolve the heretofore unresolvable question of whether another human being can own another. And clearly, the majority of people came down on the side to say that's a reprehensible process. We are not going to support it. And we had a war that lost 500,000 lives. Good thing, and I think most of us look back and say that's a good part of our history. That was the best of what we had. But we still sustained civil dialogue. When we went in to do Reconstruction in the South, we didn't shut them down. We didn't shut them up. We still gave civil dialogue to people who disagreed with us. We didn't damage people for just thinking differently. As we came through the 20th century, the United States was a bastion of liberty and freedom for all those around the world. Literally, the idea of free speech was indoctrinated into the world through the United States. The ability to speak your mind, to say what you want to say, and to do it when you want. So if I disagree with you, so what? I grew up in a world that said sticks and stones may break my bones, but names will never hurt me or words will never hurt me. What happened to us? What happened to a nation that could have civil dialogue, even though sometimes it was heated and violent? Look at the 60s. Now, in the 60s, we had the assassination of John Kennedy, Bobby Kennedy, and Martin Luther King. I remember those. I'm older than most of you, so I still remember them. I actually remember the Kennedy assassination very little. I was a little teeny kid, but I mean, we've had this issue about disagreements forever. And there have always been a fringe group of nutcases, always, and they'll always be. But it seems like something's changed over the last 10 years, and I think social media is a big part of it. But all of a sudden, it seems okay to condemn a person for simply having a different opinion than yours. You and I may disagree on abortion. I think it's wrong. I think human life is sacred, and I think we should protect it. So, okay, but you may disagree with that. That doesn't mean we have to hate each other. It just means we have a disagreement. I believe that there are two genders, man and woman. Now, again, I've dealt personally with the transsexual issue, the transvest, or whatever you call it now, the trans issue. But again, we can disagree on that. We don't have to hate each other. I'm reminded in 2012, I think it was, Joe Walsh, a congressman in Illinois, was running for re-election against Tammy Duckworth, the senator now from Illinois. And I took one of my kids to the debate between those two. And so we show up, and you have the typical Republicans on one side, Democrats on the other, and they're just yelling at each other. Nobody's getting any point across. They're just yelling at each other. And I looked at my son, who was with me that day, and I said, let's go over to the other side. We walked over the Democratic side, and it was intimidating, especially for him, because he was like, Dad, we're going to get hurt. And I was like, nah, you'll be fine. So we walked over, and I went up to what looked like one of the leaders of it, and I said, hi, clearly I'm walking over here from the Joe Walsh side, but I'd like to talk with you. He said, what about? And I said, I'm wondering if we're not here for the same thing. You're here because you want good education for your kids, right? And he said, yeah. I said, you're here because you want medical care as best we can provide it, right? He said, yeah. I said, you're here because you want income security in your old age, right? Yeah. I said, so the bottom line isn't that we disagree on the issues. It's simply how we get there. And if we can no longer even discuss differences in how we get there, then this republic will not last. Because where this goes is more tyranny. And I know some people are going to say, we're already headed there with Trump. You don't know what tyranny is if you think he's tyranny. There's as much freedom now as there's ever been in my life. In fact, more. There's no boundaries on what it means. But if we continue to hate at each other for having different views and refuse to dialogue and use violence to settle those issues, we will end up in a 1984 Bradbury book or Aldous Huxley's Brave New World. Mark my words, it'll happen. In the United States today, if somebody, and I've had these discussions for years, but people have said, why do you think we're losing the ability to have civil discourse? And I want to highlight two things. First, we've taken the generally agreed on principles of a Judeo-Christian society and thrown that out. I mean, you can't even publish the Ten Commandments in schools anymore. Secondly, we have increasingly thrown out the concept of family. And when you take faith and family out, you end up with motivations that are completely upside down and obscured. I saw a statistic recently, and it fascinated me. 25 years ago, they did a research study on a vast group of people, and they found that people's motivations and their beliefs and their living ethos, if you will, 25 years ago, it was first faith, family, country, and then down below that was like monetary wealth. If you take that same study, they just did this, and look at it today, it's money and influence. Faith and family don't even show up above 50%. That's the problem. And we have to accept that that's a problem, because when you take faith out, and I'm a devout Christian. I've had my phases in and out in my life, but the reality is I know categorically in my mind, Jesus lived, died, and rose again. I know that. But I also know there's room for the Judeo-Christian experience we had in other religions as well. They give us boundaries on behavior. When you try to take it out, there's no boundaries. Everything's subjective, and that's when you start to get these weird tails on the end of the distribution. And family, I know that it was 1968, I think, that Reagan put in California no-fault divorce. And he basically put in a law that said, what's happening then is people were getting divorced because guys were cheating on their wives. Okay, the women were cleaning up because in California, as in most states, it was considered a fault divorce. The husband's at fault, and therefore the wife gets everything. Well, in order to accept an argument that the husbands were making, that this really isn't a no-fault thing. My wife was the reason I was cheating on her, if you can ever justify that. And I'm not judging it. I'm just looking at it objectively. The fact is, it became this idea of no fault, that the divorce is between the mom and the dad, the kids will be fine. Well, the kids aren't fine. I mean, I've been through that in my life. And yes, kids can come out okay. But there's no question that their life experience has changed. No question whatsoever. And because we don't have family, we don't have continuity of values. And we don't have continuity of culture. If you go back to ancient Egypt, I think you can confirm this if you want, but I'm pretty sure it's true. There was one death penalty, and that was for adultery. And it's because Pharaoh recognized that the foundation of Egyptian society was marriage and family. And that was the one thing that could destroy family. So it was a death penalty. My point is, we've got to get back to family and faith. We have to, otherwise none of this works. And for those of you who say, well, I don't like your faith, I want my faith, I say fine. But we need to come to some ability to discuss it and accept norms. We are primarily, overwhelming majority, Judeo-Christian. Always have been, and we are today. I just find it silly that we don't allow some of those basic rules, like the Ten Commandments, to guide our kids as they grow older, to guide our society. What is wrong with thou shalt not kill? Again, we've taken that out. And so what happens? People, in this case on the left, are saying, well, these are Nazis and they're Hitler, and we should have stopped him when he started. So it's okay to kill these people. It's not okay to kill people just randomly for what they say. Yes, if a politician, an elected politician, begins to do things that are truly horrific, and I don't mean kicking illegals out of the country. That's not horrific. Look, Obama kicked more people out than Trump has done. Okay, I don't care. You may not like how he's doing it, but that's not horrific. I am talking literally, if you look at the German experience or the Soviet experience or the Chinese experience, where they penalize and criminalize mountains of people for just silly reasons. Yeah, that, okay, I kind of get the argument. But until that, it's just dialogue. Trump wants a smaller government. Now, you can say, well, he's putting the National Guard in D.C. You tell me, are we better off in Chicago? I live in Chicago. Are we better off to have 5 or 6 people a week shot? I don't think so. I think we'd be better off with the National Guard shutting that crime down right now. How are kids supposed to grow up and go to school in a society in which they're afraid to walk out the door to school? I don't know. I am obviously very upset about the Charlie thing. Most of my podcasts, or if you call them that, or these videos I do, are about business. I think we're headed to a digital age, and I want to help the business community migrate to the digital age. But part of that, I guess, has to be the development of this civil dialogue. Because the digital age, if you think we've got economic transitions now, roll this clock forward 5 or 10 years and wait until AI comes of age or the blockchain comes of age. You're going to see dislocations like we've never seen. And the only way to survive that is if we can talk together. No, we may not always agree, but at least we can talk and dialogue without one of us wanting to hurt the other one. It's necessary for a free republic to sustain. And again, especially as we move into the digital age. So I hope you'll take it to heart that we need to have truly systemic change in this country. And if you disagree with me, or if you agree with me, but if you disagree with me, tell me why. I'm not afraid of your opinions. I'm not afraid if you disagree with me. I just don't understand it. I don't understand a culture that says it's okay to do this. And I would go to those on the right, and I have a lot of friends on the right, and they're talking, this is the first shot in the Civil War. We don't even want to go there. Those things never end well for anyone. And if you want to think we're making anybody happy with that talk, it's the Chinese and the Russians. But we don't want to go there. All of us need to take a breath and try to figure out how we learn to talk with each other. Yes, passionately with belief. I get that. But without the risk of killing each other. I thank you for listening. And again, I'll be back to doing normal programs on the digital economy and where we're heading and all that. But we'll take a little bit of time to process through what just happened. Thank you, and God bless America. And God bless Charlie's family, his dear wife, and those two wonderful kids. Thanks.